A good cup of tea is special. A good cup of tea can be soothing or stimulating, a private ritual or shared pleasure. Drink enough, and you might start wondering about what you're drinking. Where does it come from? What is authentic tea? And who gets to decide? Take this, my favorite tea. It's a black tea first cultivated in China thousands of years ago. Since then, the processing of tea leaves has been refined in India, though this particular plant was grown in Kenya. As if that's not complicated enough, the process that turns the leaves into tiny nuggets, which impacts the taste and strength of the drink, was invented by a Brit less than 100 years ago. So even for just this one tea, the question of cultural ownership is messy. The question of cultural ownership for all tea is ridiculous. What about a similar kind of question? Who owns yoga? It's a question that's asked with complete seriousness, with serious consequences. While we don't ban tea from university campuses or campaign for cafes to close because of our drinking beliefs, those are both realities in the world of yoga. So let's take the next few minutes to pour out a cup of wisdom. Many people would say the story of yoga starts here, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, with the Indus Valley seal. Except the only evidence that this has anything to do with yoga is that it looks like something that could be related to yoga. Moving on. Thousands of years later, we get the actual roots of yoga with two sacred Hindu texts, the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. Yoga is only really mentioned in footnotes here, and it isn't until the Yoga Sutras that there is a comprehensive guide on the subject. For the purposes of this video, here are the 3 things you need to know. 1. Even at the start, there's diversity in yoga. The 3 texts define yoga and how to do it differently. 2. This yoga is entirely from the neck up. Yoga poses are just comfortable sitting postures to meditate in for hours. 3. If you're not Hindu and you're not a dude, you're probably not practicing yoga. That won't change until the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and a bunch of similar books from around the same time, which compiled a new version of yoga, still with a strong focus on meditation, but also 15 postures that still exist today. See, the goal in all previous yoga systems had been immortality and enlightenment. These new books are also happy to advertise yoga as a practice for greater health and greater attraction to the opposite sex. This yoga is also open for everyone, which had 2 consequences. 1, Shramanas, ascetic wanderers, spread yoga and intermingle with different cultures. Bits of Buddhism, Jainism, and even Sufism get absorbed into what we'll one day consider yoga. And 2, yogis get a bad name. Traditional Hatha yogis were bandits and beggars, contorting their bodies on street corners for coins to buy hallucinogenic drugs to go into trances. If that sounds a little strange, you're not the only one to think so. The first man to bring yoga to the West thought yoga had gone downhill after Hatha yoga, and taught yoga just like in the early days of the Yoga Sutras. This yoga is well received, but it isn't the start of the modern yoga craze. That starts with Krishnamacharya, but before we can get to him, we need to look at Scandinavia. Niels Book and Henrik Ling were Scandinavian gymnasts, both of whom have published work that showcases some poses that are practiced in yoga studios today. These poses have never been documented in any yoga literature before Book and Ling came along. But there are only so many ways you can twist a body to make a new pose, right? Right? Book and Ling also emphasize sequencing, doing one pose after another in a specific order for health and energy. Prior to these men, any yoga pose would be practiced on its own for an extended period of time. It's in Scandinavia that we see the first sequence of movements that look like a modern yoga class. As an aside, harmonial gymnastics was an important yoga prototype that connected movement to the rhythm of breathing, but it's hardly ever mentioned in the histories of yoga. Why? Simple. Harmonial gymnastics was predominantly for women and taught by women, and history books have typically been written by not women. Kaj Ali, Genevieve Stebbins, and Molly Baggettstock did amazing, groundbreaking work combining exercise with spirituality, And the only reason I'm not getting into this now is because they deserve their own video. Anyway, Scandinavian gymnastics looks like modern yoga. How did it get there? Well, British colonizers stereotyped Indian men as feeble and effeminate in an effort to make resistance appear futile. In response, the Indians pushed back, riding a wave of physical culture, and promoted the Indian strongman as the citizen ready to rise up and revolt. Wrestling and bodybuilding got pumped up in the 20s and 30s, and this work was oftentimes done in the very gyms the British had sprinkled across India, the YMCA. The posters on the walls of the Y had strength-building gymnastics routines based on the work of instructors like Buchan Ling. To better resist the British, Indian men incorporated dynamic exercise into a pre-existing physical practice in their culture, yoga. Remember Krishnamacharya? He first learned postures off the wall of his gym. He also wrote that as late as the 1930s, sun salutations, which yoga instructors swear are thousands of years old and go back before the Upanishads, weren't part of yoga. They were a part of the bodybuilding class being run by his friend next door to his yoga class. Krishnamacharya has many disciples, these are the two important ones, that eventually come to America, and at just the right time. A combination of counterculture esotericism, physical culture, and photography all line up to help this practice catch on. And catch on it does. A multi-billion-dollar industry begins. Yoga in the West becomes so popular that some of it gets exported back to India, which is why if you receive yoga training in India, you may learn postures that were invented in the West. At the end of the day, there is no ancient scripture linking the postural focus of modern yoga to pre-modern yoga. Oh, gurus will say that these ancient texts exist, but when pushed for proof, they inevitably say the only copy was eaten by ants or dictated to them in a trance by a 1,000-year-old ghost. We're left with a practice that is undeniably Indian and also not Indian. It's a dialogue, like the cultural forces required for a tea invented in China, developed in India, grown in Kenya, and processed by British engineering. There are really 5 takeaways from this. 1. Answering where yoga comes from is complicated. 2. The word yoga has multiple meanings, just like tea. Anybody who asks which is the real authentic tea doesn't understand tea. 3. Pre-modern and modern yoga aren't better or worse than each other. They're just different. Green tea isn't better or worse than black tea. It's a matter of personal taste. Insulting anyone whose favorite tea is different than yours doesn't make you right, just pompous. 4. Your experiences are valid. Although traditionalists sometimes downplay what yogis experience in postural classes, you can still have a practice that is meaningful, spiritual, and true. If you say that people can only have a powerful experience under your particular brand of spirituality, that's not a statement of enlightenment. 5. Be kind. A common thread from Hatha Yoga to modern practices is openness and inclusiveness. Whether you're searching for something soothing or stimulating, a private ritual or shared pleasure, there's space for a yoga practice that is special to you. This is the part where if I was sponsored by a certain audiobook company, I would plug Yoga Body by Mark Singleton. Singleton's landmark book is what inspired the bulk of this video, and I hope it serves as a testament to his thorough research methods, non-judgmental writing, and deep love of yoga. Thanks, Mark.